Hello and welcome to another video. So before I jump in, you may notice that the audio and visual has improved a little bit better, and I finally started to decorate my office. So who'd have thought that having a YouTube channel would finally get me to start putting some things in like shelves and books and soon to be pictures, etc. And apologies, I do have a little bit of a cold that I caught from my son who brought it home from daycare, which is the joys of having a kid in daycare. But anyway, on with the video. So one friend asked, do I prefer front end or back end? I had to think about this one a little bit. So I am technically a full stack developer, but the caveat there is that I work in Ruby on Rails, which is a full stack framework. So it's not like a distributed system where you might have, say, microservices. You have a front end that handles something in, say, React, Vue, Ember.js, etc., and then a back end that just does the back end. So you have two separate applications. They're very distinct, front end and back end. Whereas in Ruby on Rails, it's a model view controller framework or construction in the framework. So it's all integrated into one. And I think it's a little bit easier to use, at least to get basic views or front end up and running. In Ruby on Rails, it's very simple. There's not really any separate application to deal with. No setup that you have to go through with. I know setting up React is super simple, but it is still going to be separate from the back end. In Rails, it's way simpler, and there's conventions that help you connect your back end with your front end very, very seamlessly. However, when you start getting into more dynamic, reactive pages, then Rails, at least up to the last few years, has been a little bit lackluster in that, and that's where these front-end frameworks have really shone. There's tons of front-end frameworks, but having a nice dynamic web page that's nicely designed, it's been way easier to build in a front-end dedicated framework. That's why you see in many cases you have a Rails backend and a React front-end for that reason. But in the last couple of years with Hotwire in Rails, the front ends are becoming a lot more dynamic and really rivaling what you can build in a dedicated front-end framework. Anyway, that's just some preamble. So it's a little different for me. I'm not working specifically in a front-end framework, though I have. When I was at FreshBooks, I worked in Ember.js and React. And that was dedicated front ends with Python backends and many different microservices. Which do I prefer? I'd have to say that I do prefer working on the back end, but that's mostly because I do that the most and have done that the most. Front end is probably my weaker of the two. And as a full stack developer, I am expected to be able to work in both front end and back end, and I can. But if I had to choose one, I'd say back end is the one I'm better at, most comfortable in, and enjoy doing the most. And the reasons for that is, well, when you work for a small company, most of the work that gets done is on the back end, because the back end is where all the business logic lives. This is where the heart and soul of the business, the value that you're providing to your users, it lives on the back end. And the front end is just what makes that interaction with the back end an enjoyable experience. And that's not to downplay the front end. The front end is still very important. But I think that if you have a very solid back end that's well built and designed and follows business principles and captures all of that domain logic of the core business rules and rule sets, then you're going to have a good functioning application. And I enjoy turning that business logic into code, because that's really the challenge. And when you get something complex that you have to figure out and you get it working, well, the sky's the limit. It's quite exciting to build that kind of stuff. So I'd say that for that reason, I do prefer working on the back end. Though, when you get to build cool front end stuff, that's really exciting too. When you're building a nice, really well designed layout, some nice, simple but useful functionality and interactivity that's playing with the DOM in real time so things are dynamic. That's fun as well. I'm not a big fan of front ends that are overusing these kind of tools, techniques, and gimmicks, let's say, to make things flashy. I think in some cases it's really cool, but most of the time it's overdone. I really appreciate simple, clean layouts with just nice dynamic elements that make sense. And when you get to build that kind of stuff, that's really exciting as well. Though working with the DOM is the document object model, that is, for me, it's something I have to keep relearning when I go back, because usually I work on backend for a couple weeks at a time, and then I might get a front end component that's a little more than just a basic building of a UI with markup. I actually have to build some dynamic stuff. Then I have to remember, okay, how am I going to work with the DOM and JavaScript, etc. So obviously in a front end framework, those conventions are all set out for you with how you write the JavaScript and interact with the DOM. In Ruby on Rails, at least what I work with professionally, it's a Rails 5 application, so it's very much kind of a 2014, 2015 technology. It's a little dated. It's not really great for that dynamic experience that Rails can now achieve. So I'm running a lot of JavaScript that interacts with the DOM and making AJAX or asynchronous JavaScript and XML requests to the backend to make things update in a seemingly dynamic manner. So that's also probably what puts me a little bit off of doing anything more than simple in the front end, is that I have to write this additional JavaScript and use AJAX requests and handle data coming into the back end and coming from the back end to the front end, etc. I find it a little clunky, and there are better ways to do that nowadays anyway. But it's okay, it is still fun to build out front end. And I would say whatever you choose, whether should you have to choose, I think it depends on what your goals are. If you want to become a full stack developer, then obviously you need to understand both front end and back end. But if you want to become just a back-end developer or just a front-end developer, I still think that there's a ton of value in understanding how the other end works. So if you're a front-end developer, I think it's really good to know, well, what is the back-end doing exactly? What kind of data do I need to send the back-end? What's it doing with that data? How can I write my requests in a way that's going to work well with the back-end? I think these are things you need to understand. As a back-end developer, it's the opposite. When I'm writing endpoints that the front end's going to hit, well, what kind of data am I going to receive? What kind of requests am I going to get? How do I package up this data to then provide a response back to the front end? I think these things are really valuable to know and will only improve your abilities and skills as a front-end or back-end developer if you understand a bit more of a whole picture. And I'd say finally, the last thing that I want to say on this is that I don't think full stack developers are ever going to be the best at front end or back end because they're spread more thin. We only have a certain amount of time and hours to really learn and improve our craft, right? So it stands to reason that someone who's full stack, focusing both front end and back end, is probably not going to be as much of an expert as someone who focuses on only front end or back end. But that's okay because many companies are okay and can get by with full stack developers who are good enough at building front ends and back ends. They may not be the quickest, it may not be the best code, but that's why I think a blend is ideal in bigger companies where you have front end experts and back end experts to guide the full stack developers. But even smaller companies make it work working in full stack. I think there's many ways to skin a cat when you're building code. Some ways are better than others, and generally you'll find ways to make it work. So what do you think? Maybe you're not a developer yet, maybe you are. What is your preference? Front end, back end? Why is that? Do you prefer building business logic and solving those problems, or do you prefer working with building nice, interactive, good-looking UIs? Yeah, I'd like to know about that. So let me know in the comments. And as now I'm a YouTuber, please like, subscribe, comment, and let me know what you think of the new setup. Okay, have a good one.